Hello and welcome to Ignore All Previous Instructions. I am here this week with Anoy. Hello. May I
Hi.
ask you to introduce
Hi.
yourself to the crowd?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for asking me. I really, really appreciate it. I am Tanveer Anoy. My full name is MT Tanveer Anoy, but I go with Tanveer Anoy. Right now, I'm staying in Gore Valley, Oregon, because I just finished my master's in women, gender, and sexuality studies from Oregon State University, and I'm very excited for my next chapter. Right. I'm an activist, academic, archivist, and author. I'm from Dhaka, Bangladesh, and I have been in queer activism the last 12 and 13 years. And I like writing, I like archiving. I run two organizations. One is Mondro, Bangladesh Queer Archive, the first and largest archive in Bangladesh, and another one is Bangladesh Feminist Archives, which recently I have founded. I have been working in this particular gender sexuality spectrum for a very long time, and also my focus is more likely most likely my academic focus is transnational feminism, transnational sexualities, South Asian queer um, studies, and etc. So I think that's a really long intro for my side. I'm sorry if it's
Great.
not
No,
much.
you're fantastic.
Okay, thank
So yeah, so
you.
you and I originally met at a computer camp in the woods is how I describe it. So we went to this D-Web distributed web conference in California. You were there as a fellow. And I just remember that you had this session on queer spaces. And because the that for being a technology conference, there was a lot of I think, especially when we think about the distributed web, a lot of the reasons we talk about it is how do we connect, and also archiving seems to be very much like the topic in that community. But I really enjoyed our the conversations we had there, and so I was excited to bring you on.
Pam, that's really sweet of you. I really, really appreciate it. And I really had the similar experience with you. I really had a blast to talking with you in the web. And I don't know how I ended up there because I don't know what
So was
happened
it
to
like
me.
how did you become a fellow? I mean, the because there's it's an internet archive heavy
Yeah, like
situation, and so it makes sense that you're there.
so back in when I founded Mondro in 2019 in Bangladesh, like I really, religiously search through the archives, which were like, available in internet. And
Okay, okay.
the first thing came up is the Internet Archive, right? So
Yes.
I'm a very big, well, like, big fan of the Internet Archive. I was like, wow, this
Yeah.
is a very sorted out situation, sorted out archive. And I have been following their, kind of like their module, their structure, a little bit to structure
Hmm.
my archive. But last year, one of my colleagues from my university, they kind of like sent me a link about like this T-Web happening. And I went through that
Hmm.
and I was very, very intrigued to see, this is kind of the community they have developing for a long time. And I was very excited to see
Hmm.
that. But I was also very, very scared to apply because whatever I have read, the previous blogs and stuff as well, it felt very
Mm.
technical. It's very felt like a very take. No, I don't want to say the phrase called take bro or something. It's like a
Right.
like it's a very toned
Hmm.
down, like a very decolonizing take bro, like I would say, conference. But then
Yeah.
again, when I explored the other projects and stuff as well, that kind of like led me to apply to this particular fellowship. And I was shocked as hell when I got selected because I was like, I don't think like a very small archive from Bangladesh. I'm a very amateurish archivist from Bangladesh doing queer archiving and also feminist archiving. I would get selected and I'm very, very proud and also very thankful towards them that like they have selected me. But absolutely, that was a very terrifying, I would say, experience for me overall because of like I never ever been in that community. which has
It's
changed later
interesting.
after experiencing like folks like
Sure.
you. There's so many folks I have met, but it was a very, very overwhelming experience
It's a
for
very
me.
daunting idea. And it it generates kind of an interesting it makes me think about the spaces that are created for talking about these things and who's there, which uh, does in fact matter in terms of who gets to be in that space, because that's whose ideas get presented. And you say,
Yeah.
like, oh, big deal, I just organized this, the first queer archive in Bangladesh and the feminist archive. Is like, no, that's exactly who we want, who would add to the conversation versus the bunch of people who look and think the same.
Honestly
And
speaking,
so,
I never thought that like my archives would be kind of like, because there's standardization and stuff as well. And I'm not going to get into very details because I know like sort of read about the stuff as well. And San Francisco itself is a very, like a utopian zone. I always said that like a tech utopia, but it's sort of dystopia. But I got really, really like, shocked to see like, okay, fine, that also gave me a confidence about talking my projects to other people as well. Because as a queer person from Bangladesh, we really do have this tendency about like playing low, always playing
mm,
low, that like, whatever you're doing, you have to like to do like behind the curtains, and like these are the things are not being socially recognizable, or like there's a lack of social identity in Bangladesh. So that kind of like created a really big impact on me, that like I sometimes feel very uncomfortable talking about this stuff in USA,
mm,
particularly because of I really thought really think that like it's not like something they can comprehend, right? Because whenever
I
even
mean,
in the
probably
way,
true.
whenever I had to talk about Bangladesh, I really had to like to put my map out and say like, is Bangladesh is here, right? And also the significance
Yeah.
of the projects, right? Sometimes whenever I'm in a conversation in like big, lunches and dinners and stuff as well, there are some folks like they just got up and like never talked to me because of like that's nothing that's very much amusing or like very much alluring to them. But there are folks like you stayed and you wanted to know more, and that kind of like balance it out, because I was really like a like I was really like a fish who just like throw it in a like a very uncomfortable temperature
Yeah.
water, and I just wanted to survive. And trust me,
Hmm.
the few days were very tough for me, but the last few days were amazing for me, because I think that the I also pushed myself a little bit to like to communicate with people, but the experiences weren't that great on the largest antennas, because you have to like to sit with all the unknown people
Oh,
around you.
that's a
Yeah,
whole. That's like I definitely started just sitting by myself or
yeah,
only sitting because it's just
yeah,
so daunting.
yeah. The
It's
last few,
and converse with
yeah,
hundreds of people
yeah.
and
The last few days I really wanted to. The first few days I was like, push myself doing that. But when I kind of like saw that like they're not very much interested like to hear my project, because each and every time I really had to like to explain myself, who am I, where I'm from, and what is my project, right? And this become kind of like a, like a parrot thingy all the time. And I think the last
mm.
2 or 3 days I said like, you know what, you wouldn't be interested in my project, so let's cut the chase, let's be silent. So it's more
Let's
likely that,
relax. Have some
because
quiet
of,
time in the woods.
yeah, I was like, you eat
Yeah,
alone, I eat alone, we're fine.
it's
Okay,
fine.
we don't have to communicate just because we nice. Okay, I'm not your person. Okay, so it's more likely
Yeah,
that.
yeah, that's okay. But so I used to ask about the archives. So about starting, so I've heard you tell the story of like how you kind of started the first archive, and I feel like that would be a really cool story for people to hear about how you started the first archive. And I think you referenced it already, but I think it's really important to share the context because it's not as for people in the United States, the context of starting something like this is not something that they would, assume the context of to understand of, oh, what does it mean? And like, where is it geographically? Like, where did you put this stuff?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I all the time whenever I talk, I have to put some context first, and then I have to talk
Mm-hmm.
And so Bangladesh is a country, it's neighboring to Myanmar and India, and we used to be a one country and ruled by British. Before 1947, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh used to be one country, but after partition in 1947, we got divided based on religion. So West Pakistan is right now the Pakistan. India got in the middle, and we used to be called as East Pakistan. But we fought a war with Pakistan back in 1971 because our religion might be same, but our culture is very different. So culturally, language-wise, we're very different. That's why we got separated in 1971 with a war. But then again, after that, we also kind of, accepted a lot of colonial law in our new constitutions because I am not going to go into very historical details, but it seems like a lot
Yeah,
of
there's
lo- a lot of leaders were all still are in a colonial hangover, so they thought that like
yeah,
the British,
or that this is how
constitution.
you run a government.
Absolutely. And also the
Sure.
British Constitution is sounds like amazing. So you just adopt it. You do not write your
Mm-hmm.
own things. So there's a one law
Mm-hmm.
called the 377, which is the anti-sodomy law, and that kind of kept in Bangladesh. So this law states that like if two homosexuals, like a same-sex people, are engaging in intercourse, then it's illegal. And that kind of became the anti, homosexual law and anti-LGBTQ law in Bangladesh. And it's so interesting
Mm-hmm.
the law states that even two people are having sex, there should be one witness to witness
Right.
intercourse.
Someone
Yeah. So,
to
and
report it.
then yeah, so like in previous in Bangladesh, there are so many. Like there's a one particular incident happening in 2017 in Dhaka, the capital city of Bangladesh, and they arrested from some gay people from a party, but they couldn't put them in a 377 law case because they never saw them to having sex.
No
So
one witnessed them.
yeah, so the police started to
Wow.
like report
Yeah.
them in a narcotics or drugs related, I would say, like
Mm.
crime. So that is because there's possession stuff as well. And in Bangladesh, is a Muslim, 95% is Muslim, is a very conservative in that sense. Booze or alcohol is not permitted. If you're other kind of like religion people or like you're a foreigner, you have to have a license to like to have alcohol. So like it's a very different,
Mm-hmm.
demographic. So coming back to the context is that in that particular air zone, LGBTIQ seems like a very foreign concept to Bangladeshi people. But Hijra, that is something is not transgender. That's a cultural, I would say, group which have been existed for a very long time. They're more like a femme persons, like to be like stay like a femme, and they just express themselves. So hijab people can be intersex, trans women, anything they can be. But there's a misconception in Bangladesh that like all the hijab people are intersex, right? So that's why like
Mm.
they think that like that if you have a distorted genitalia, you're hijra, okay? And they're being segregated in a separate group of people, and then they don't have basic rights because it also happened in during the colonial era. The British kind of like found hijab people very much, they're being very loud and proud, and they used to be like in the king consort and like the queen's, I would say, ears and eyes, so they kind of criminalized them. And after that when they left, it just stayed like that way, criminalizing or
Yeah.
like othering this particular group. So this group kind of survived in Bangladesh by, like going to streets asking money, or like, going to a house where a new baby born, and they kind of dance and stuff as well, and they get money. So this hijra culture
Mm.
has their own, law system, their own, you know, language, everything by themselves. And it's also hijra people are also those people who are kind of like low class of people in Bangladesh who cannot figure it out whenever their son, like biological sons, feels like that like they're acting femme. So what they do is that they take
Mm.
them and give it to the hijra areas, and they say,
Yeah.
we are not going to like
Is
to
this
do
one of
that.
you? Yeah.
So yeah. So
Mm.
so that happens. But for the upper class people, they do have so much pride that like they kind of like, kind of control it. by doing a
Mm-hmm.
lot of stuff, like do manly stuff, blah, blah, blah. But that's not always happen. So that particular people kind of like becomes other, like, they're in their own. So that's a very different conversation. But the one thing I really wanted to say, like the concept of LGBTIQ is very foreign to Bangladesh, but it's the concept of like femme, hijra, they're
Right.
still
Or
there,
gender
right?
nonconformity is.
Absolutely. Non-binary, absolutely they're there. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There's like absolutely there.
That's like,
But
oh,
then again,
obviously these people don't fit, and there's this
yeah,
category, and this is what they
yeah.
do.
Yeah. So
Although
Bangladesh,
that's, is there, sorry, a question is, so that's, so hijab, that's more in the, so more femme presenting. Is there like, what happens to the butches or like the gender non-conforming women?
um,
They just don't, they don't make it.
you there's a joke in Bangladesh. It's like only gay people exist. Gay men exist in Bangladesh. There's no woman can be LGBTIQ. Okay, because the
Uh,
woman, the woman rights and everything is very socially so conservative in Bangladesh. So existing in non-conforming or like in a lesbian space is very hard for women. It's easier for like cis male gay because they can do whatever because with their male also
because then they have male
privilege. Yeah,
privilege.
and it's easily accessible, and there's always they took this advantage and they do whatever they want to do. Okay, so that's a really really tough matter. So coming back to that is that so this whole westernization and stuff as well they say it's hard for them to like to get this whole LGBTQ. And I'm not saying that like I'm very fond of this LGBTIQ terminologies because we're also trying our very best to like to localize our own one. Okay. But until unless we
Sure.
find something, we kind of like adopted LGBTIQ and we do not have any problem with it. We're still searching for like, our own local, terminologies. And it will take time because West has an impact to the world, and we do acknowledge
Mm-hmm.
that. But it's also our duty to decolonize as well. So you take that,
Mm-hmm.
you churn it out because how we decolonize English, right? There's Indian English, there's Chinese English. English is not no longer belong to England, right? Where it where they kind of say they started or like they have kind of like adverted, advice, sorry, kind of promoted,
Uh,
right? Kind of
yeah,
promoted that,
they
like,
disseminated it, they put it out there,
yeah,
but
yeah, it's
then
like,
a consequence of, yes, like a consequence of putting things out is that, well, then people are allowed to, you forced it upon them, and now, well, they get to take it and do something with it.
and they
That
took it,
seems
and
fair.
they have
Yeah.
turned into a very different way. Like, I also grew up with colonial fever that like I have to talk English in a certain way or have to write in this
Mm.
certain way. Even I didn't learn English, like because I never ever found English as like like a very like like a very very nice language to be adopted. I never felt that way. Okay, I'm sorry to say I learned
It's
English.
okay. It's just,
I
yeah.
learned it because I love my mother language Bangla and I used to write it like a fiction writer. I'm also in that particular
Oh, lovely.
language, but I had to learn English because of to survive. Because from third world country, if you do not learn English, you do not get a good job. You will not survive anywhere. Okay, so the more likely the hierarchy starts with that language. Okay, so in Bangladesh, LGBTIQ rights is not acknowledged. There's some sort of future rights been acknowledged, and sometimes people do confuse about trans women intersex with hijra. They kind of like turned into third gender. There's so much mess are going on. But then again, we kind of like use each other terminologies at least to exist. Okay, because existence is very crucial. So
Yeah.
in 2016 two of our activists were killed in their houses, and it just changed the whole landscape of the community. And after that, we just realized that like nobody is going to save us. Nobody is not going to like vocal, like show their vocalization for us. They're not going to do that because of the society, because society is not sensitized enough to like to accept us. So that particular time, I kind of like, felt very alone and very much
Mm.
seeing that like nobody is giving a damn to like to archive our stuff. So that kind of like motivated me to like to at least start something by myself. Okay. And there are some amazing colleagues of mine. I will not um, name them because of their safety and security matter to
Yeah,
me. So
absolutely.
they kind of helped me, and we together go person to person. There are so many. So queer folks in Bangladesh do not write with their real name. They have their own, fake IDs on Facebook. They have own their pages, groups, and stuff as well. They express themselves there. So those creations we started archiving them first, and that's how our archive started growing. I always say like this is the first and largest public archive because there have been a lot of archives before, but we do not have any trace of that. Okay, so to kind of like,
Right.
to honor those other archives which never came out, or maybe there's existence of them. So that's why we say first public archive to like to make sure that we are also honoring the previous efforts as well. And we're still going on, we still kind of archiving stuff. There's so many disbanded organization stuff we also kind of archive. It's just a continuous process. And we really, 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 really do agree that like archiving can be also a tool to like to show people that like we exist, right? And after Monto, there have been a lot of new archives emerging, especially queer archives, and they're doing some amazing job to like to make sure that like our diversified voices, not just particular voices, are being archived. There have been a lot of diversified voices, different versions of like people's histories and stuff as well, they're being archived. So that's it for the queer archive stuff.
I think
Mhm.
that's so I I can tell you a little actually in the last couple weeks I've gone to a couple events produced by the Queer Archives in Philadelphia. So we
Right.
have the William Way archives and I when you describe your archive something that that's I find interesting some of the I went to they did a short film series and people in Philadelphia or who are just interested in this you can they have an Instagram account and you can follow their them they have a newsletter so you can get emails about events
Yeah,
but
you
they
should meet
had
me with them.
oh yeah I would love yeah they would love to I'm sure they would love to connect so
Yeah.
because one of the things you talk about oh these what about archives like there probably have been this human instinct to save and collect and to remember and this thing that we do as people that then for communities whose stories don't get saved for them to do that so looking at so one of they did short films or art footage from the archives and one of the series of things that they showed was it was basically some home movies that like from a couple that lived in Philadelphia and they were clearly very well off because they had lots of film of their wonderful vacations and hanging out with lots of beautiful men on the beach and so but it was really interesting to see of people the things that got recovered from people's homes like or in estates and saying like oh there's this community that would really really like to preserve this and so that's what the William Way archives do for Philadelphia and the Philadelphia because Philadelphia is a in queer rights Philadelphia is in
Yeah.
the United States it's like a big nexus of queer rights and queer
Yeah.
rights
Yeah.
organizing.
Now, it also imposes a really good, question that like, which I always heard that like, are your archive like well archived or like or with the structure or not? Because I always have heard from since beginning when I started the archive, like a lot of like snobby academics came to me and said, "Oh
Mm,
no, this is not the way you archive and stuff as well. You have to like to go
mm,
and like blah blah blah, recording and stuff as well." And also, there's been a lot of chat about like which materials are archival or which are not, right? So these are
yeah
the things I
what
had to
deserves
do.
to be saved that's a
Absolutely,
really interesting
absolutely.
question
And even
it's a political question I would say
it's a political
yeah
question. Is also particularly in academia, there's always a structure and kind of. I think Queer Archive kind of breaks that structure, saying that like
mm,
I'm going to just like yap about something and just record it and I put it in the archive. Why not? Because of like archiving shouldn't be like in a structure, right? It should be preserved. There's like there's fragments. These are fragments of our lives, okay? And that should
Mm.
be like until and unless that's a like I do not encourage like bigotry, racist, misogynist, like things like in my experience, a lot of gay men can be misogynist, right? So I also
Yeah.
seen that like their materials being very anti-woman and stuff as well. These are the things we can talk about later and like figure it out like how that can be have this space. But then again, the question about like what is quality work and what is not quality work, I have heard so many times whenever I work with people say like, oh, these are like very poorly written fiction story. I'm just like,
Oh.
these are written by closeted queer people from like a very, 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 like I would say, disadvantaged villages where they don't have the exposure coming to a capital city and having their life as a vibrant queer person, right? Even in the black
Mm.
store, they kind of experience their love, okay? And it can be cheesy as hell, but it doesn't give
That
me,
sounds very, that sounds
yeah,
wonderful.
yeah,
That
and
sounds
also
great.
it doesn't
And it's
give
a
me the
breadth of
yeah.
experience. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it doesn't give me the right, like it's not quality work, right? It doesn't like, like
Mm.
it's not, it's just they're expressing themselves. If they're saying that that's a fiction story they have written, I would be proud to like to it. And that's something I kind of fought it with other folks as well. That like and then kind of they kind of said to me that like we do not do quality works because we just archive this, bunch of poems, bunch of stories, bunch of like very fragmented thoughts and stuff as well. And I really do think these are the power of like queer voices, that like the fragmentations, the fragments, they're like weak here because I always said like our queer lives is more like a stream of consciousness. You just like go on
Mm.
and on and on and on and on because of like we experience so many different stuff in our whole life. So there's no particular you can put any structure on it, right? So it's very hard for me for like right now I have a voice I can just but first in the beginning I was very young, I was just in my bachelor's and I got very easily consumed by the elite academics or like scholars saying to me
Sure.
and I
And they're
feel very
speaking with authority. So
absolutely
it's
and I
natural to you listen first and then you start questioning.
yeah, and
That's
I felt very
the
bad,
saying.
and I felt very small. I felt very kind of,
Mm.
like not doing like enough work, or I'm just saying that uh, like like there's always a question about like is this archive going to sustain or not? Okay, so that is the question always stayed with me, and
Mm.
we have survived 5 years, and I really do think like we will survive more than 100 years
Yeah.
if that's possible. But but now these things really do not get to me. Okay, I used to be very upset with these things, and like I wanted to change, like based on their opinions. But right now we just say,
Mm.
we don't care. We just wanted to like to do whatever we like to do. Okay. So if you have any problem, if you want to stay with us, stay. If you don't, bye bye. Okay.
That's
It's more
okay.
likely that. Yeah.
But then so then something that we were talking about in the pre-show, you're talking about so then you so and we kind of talked about so queer archives and then feminist archives.
Yeah.
And so how you found you're in this kind of reflected in your own journey in terms of going in from queer activism to realizing that this is all kind of all part of this bigger weaving.
Yeah. So historically in Bangladesh, all the movements are kind of like interconnected to each other. So even whenever we're having our LGBTIQ rights stuff, all the feminists are activists always been with us. Like they're the like a torch barrier for us for a long time. And but
Mm.
then again, there's a lack of comprehension of I would say within the community that like feminist stuff is not just separate stuff. It's just not a woman's stuff. Okay, you can be a feminist queer. Feminist issues are
Mm-hmm.
queer issues, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so when I created Mondro, I have a really good friend who like manages one of the biggest feminist organization in Bangladesh, and we kind of like exchange ideas and started collaborating with each other. I think that kind of like like pushed a lot of people to like to understand that like collaboration can happen, and these are like very interconnected. So that
Hmm.
particular time, I also kind of I learned a lot of intersectionality, a lot of feminist centric stuff that like I like my work also changed. Like my work is to be very, very moderate, and like you just focus on like being just the queer LGBTIQ or the particular, so. But then again, I started thinking more feminist way, more intersectional way. That kind of like led
And
me to like.
what does that mean to you? What does that mean to you to think intersectionally?
So I would be very honest to you. For me, feminism means that, feminism means that, like, it recognizes the heteropatriarchy in the system. Okay, the things
Hmm.
like the whole, that this man has created, or that established, a structure where other, suppressed groups are being suppressed. That's something feminism acknowledges and offers a solution. That's feminism to me. Okay, that's
Hmm.
like like that's feminist. Like that's feminist way to like to tackle it. Like it's just recognize the problems and dismantle the whole situation. That like this is should be like to do that. Kind of like pointed out. For me, intersectionality is that you gather all the voices. Okay, whenever our indigenous voice is being suppressed, I just cannot say that and say like queer people are being oh, much more oppressed than indigenous people. No, that is not a competition. Okay, I feel
Hmm.
that when an indigenous person is being oppressed in my privileged position, it's my right to like to go there and help it out, or like offer my help, or like acknowledge that like they're being oppressed. When a labor rights is going to like to because all the system, our whole collective way, our fight is with the powerful people, right? The majority people who's being imposing things and like creating like a situation where we are being very much obliged to like to obey them, or like surrender
Hmm.
to that structure, right? So
Right.
for me, intersectionality is the combination. I can be queer, but also I can. I also belong to a lower class or economically not very much doing well. So these are all of my identities. How I can just talk about my one identity and just not to talk about what is my class, what is my race, what is my ethnicity, what is my situation in the society. How I will eliminate that. So if you eliminate those stuff and just to like stick with identity, that cannot like bring out the solution out of it. Okay. So that's something for me is intersectional attitude, like a combination of every section of your life to make sure that like, there's a lot of indigenous queer people in Bangladesh as well. I come from a majority, like I'm Bengali. Bengali is more likely the majority in the country, right? And also I have my identity as a religion wise is Muslim. I grew up in a Muslim family. So in that sense, I have two privileges that like as Muslim and as well a Bengali, right? But in that sense, an indigenous person, they do not have that kind of like privilege. They have chopped it out. But if I say that like me as a queer person and an indigenous person and a queer person, we're in the same boat, we are wrong. Okay. That's
It
wrong.
misses some nuance.
Absolutely. And
Hmm.
acknowledging that hierarchy, that even in a queer spaces, I am also kind of like, as a privileged person, I need to like to provide that like the people are being, I'm acknowledging and also trying to offer the help, or like trying to create a space where things are going to like to being unequal. That is my job to do. So acknowledging these intersectionalities is very much important in my area. And I really do think like feminism does an excellent job. You know, intersectional feminism does excellent job to like to acknowledge that. And as an intersectional feminist, I really do feel that like feminism is also part of my identity, not just being a queer. Feminism is also my identity. That's something I do agree with that. And not just feminism, it's intersectional feminism.
Hmm.
And it chunk around more transnational feminism and stuff as well. So yeah, I think I gave you a very long answer, but I got a
Well,
little bit.
I asked, I realized I asked because sometimes we are humans and we're talking on a podcast and we throw around a bunch of words and then we say intersectional, but then I don't actually believe people are always necessarily talking about the same thing. And so I want to make sure that we're,
And
what are we actually
absolutely,
talking about?
and
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 and so
my definition of feminism, maybe you will not agree. There are a lot of people who are listening to this, they will not agree, and I have no issues with that. Okay, but
right.
one thing I really dislike whenever they kind of like say like feminism is all about men hating, blah blah blah, and that is
Mm,
something I do not agree and I do not
mm-hmm,
endorse. Okay, so you do not come to me and say like you hate feminism just because it promotes like men hating. I was like, you know what? You are just kind of like interpreting the whole situation in your own benefit, okay? And I do not give these
mm-hmm,
people any kind of like attention. So like, you know what? Don't come to me and like, on this me like saying like those stuff, okay? And this is why I chose to like to explain myself, because for me feminism has a and different definition. Intersectional feminism has a different definition from my side, and maybe your definition is might be different based on your struggle, based on your experience, based on your priorities. Absolutely fine with that. But you do not come to me and say like queer rights are not feminist issue. Okay. That is something I will not accept that. Okay. Or queer people saying that like, I'm not a feminist. Feminism,
right.
these are like for women issues. I have no issues with it. I have issues with that whenever you say that. You
Mm-hmm,
choose not to be feminist, but you do not come to say that like which is feminist and which is not feminist. Okay. So that is
mm-hmm.
something you cannot draw the line. Okay. You choose not to be a one, but don't come and like, give me like knowledge about it. So yeah.
Yes,
So
I think where we were talking about about creating the feminist archive. I think that's where we
yeah,
were.
yeah. Um
And you had
I
talked
don't
to
know.
your friend at the feminist organization, and
Yeah.
then it
I mean,
happened?
that didn't happen like a like a overnight. But when I was
Of course.
working in
Yeah.
Mondro, the 5 years, I always felt the lack of like feminist movements, more like intersectional feminist movement
Mm,
being archived. I talked here, there, and also kind of like pushed a lot of feminists to like to that those are in a mainstream feminism, organizing and stuff as well. And they're also always busy, and it's a really requires a lot of energy and us to do that. Being a feminist in Bangladesh, it sucks, extremely sucks all the time.
That's being a
It's
feminist in Bangladesh sucks is a a great
yeah,
take.
it sucks as a queer,
It's
it sucks as a
it
feminist
sounds
because
that it's exhausting.
exhausting as hell. There are so many
Mm,
multiple Facebook groups which has like billions of group members who just say feminism is a cancer or anti-feminist rhetoric. And there are so many, fast. And even you say one particular thing about feminists and you're just done. So even when I created Feminist Archive, a lot of folks are like, do you want to use that feminist word in the archives? Because
right.
there's a big
Because
chance
that's,
that like you're going
you
to be
know,
trolled, and there are a lot of folks, there are very moderate folks who are like a very woman rights centric people. They also do not kind of like get fear to like to submit a piece to that Bangladesh Feminist Archives because of they're the feminist, because there's a word politics, these are
right.
people feminists, but then again, they don't want to acknowledge feminists in public because it's a very, very easy way to like to troll you or like, tarnish your like reputation and stuff as well. So to like to be engaged with this group, you also have to learn the language, how they also kind of like, so, I
Mm-hmm,
have seen a lot. I have a certain privilege, so like I use feminist words, but there are a lot of folks who work in a rural areas and have limited knowledge and stuff as well. They can easily get targeted, and like they don't have this whole luxury. I always select feminist word is also a part of a luxury, because of like
mm-hmm,
we hear like I don't know like how long I have used this feminist word very very much, um widely in Bangladesh. And in my last few of like years when I was Bangladesh, I used it. But then again, it also depends on like, the spaces and like where you go and what are the people you just like hang out with. So I failed to like to create Bangladesh Feminist Archives because like that's why I'm saying like the feminist movements, also women movement, labor movement. There are so many movements going around intersectionality, but they're being not archived very nicely or very in a particular way. There are so many old women organizations, they're not capable enough to like to also archive stuff, right? So I think I felt the necessity. I consulted some of my feminist friends, and they kind of gave me the encouragement. And there have been so many amazing feminist organizers who have always been very kind to me, and they're giving me hope. And also, and I didn't heard a single bad or hatred comment from within my community about doing that. Also, I have heard that like
Mm.
a lot of people saying like from the queer community saying that, oh, you're abandoning us and you could migrating to the
Oh, that you're
Australia. But
quitting
then
and
again,
you're
I was like,
like, no, that's like if they're part of, like, they have a relationship, so
this
you're
is
not
so
quitting one
bizarre.
and doing the
Yeah,
other.
this is so
Yeah.
bizarre that like we kind of like
Mm.
put like a competition with so like feminist versus queer. I feel the same. I do not like right now. I cannot like remove myself like from queer terminology or queer word. I also cannot remove feminism or feminist in my identity. So these are the very integral situation. If someone say like you have to choose between feminism or queer, I was like, I'm not going to do that.
It's not a
And
yeah, it's not a fair
that's
question.
not a that's not a point of conversation. That's not
Mhm.
negotiable. Okay, so that's something I do. And after doing that, feminist archives, I got so many support from the feminist organizers, and they've been so kind to me, and they have been donating their stuff and like engaging us stuff as well. I'm very excited about all the feminist archives because we really do have a lot of stuff to do, but then again, lack of funds, and not all the time you
Sure.
do have the time to like to do that. So
Mhm.
archives do not sustain because of like there's a lot of disinterest from the donor. I would say like circles. They right now like this UN sponsored advocacy workshops, trainings. These are the stuff. They're all praised. Like I heard so many people when I kind of like used to like to address Mondro to pitch donors
Oh,
about
to
this
get
and like
okay.
to get fund or like sustain it because it's very hard to like to maintain an archive. And they always say like, oh my God, such a fantastic idea, but we do not have fund for that. That's like,
Right.
okay. I mean, what's the, like you all talk about
Yeah.
decolonizing, blah, 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 blah. And then you say, like, okay, now I can. But then again, there are some amazing donors who also kind of acknowledge this and, like, also support this. So for Bangladesh Feminist Archives, I'm very excited. I'm thinking of like making various divisions like queer, indigenous, labor workers, um, so different student, like there are like different projects I wanted to create under the Bangladesh Feminist Archive. So that's why I'm saying it's archive. So like there's multiple archive, you know, supporting this particular, it's like an umbrella term or like a like kind of like a
Mhm.
mothership, and then you create, the your child and stuff as well. So I'm very excited to like to expand in future, but our right now very focused on like to address those archives, those vulnerable fields which are not being archived very well. Okay, so that's why we're kind of like focusing on like what are the things are just going away or like just not being archived very well or like if we do not do that right now, it wouldn't be able to like to archive or like record this stuff in future, right? So these are the things we are very much concerned and like kind of addressing and stuff as well.
And is the I guess the archive mostly digital, or is there physical archive as well?
So for Mondro archive, we try to keep it very much, I would say, digital because of like when
Mhm.
I was in my house. So when I was in my Bangladesh house, So I used to live with my parents. It's very typical living with your Southeast parents in that sense. So my room used to be the, you know, archive. Like there's so
Mhm.
many like hard copies and stuff as well. I used to keep it in my room. But when
That's
I moved out,
I learned at this short film event in Philadelphia that that's the gay community center was someone's apartment before
yeah,
it.
yeah,
Like it used to be someone's apartment, and
I really
eventually,
hope my
and
parents won't say this, but take over the property, whenever I take over the property, it's going to be a gay community center. Okay, so
great,
I
love
will be
it.
go back to Bangladesh and like turn into like no, but physical archiving in Bangladesh, particularly queer stuff, is very difficult because it has no like legality or like state sponsorship or like state recognition. The police can come and raid anytime.
Sure,
So we kind of like
yeah.
spread out stuff to different friends of group, but then again we realize like we need to like do. So queer archive is mostly digital, and also Bangladesh Feminist
Mm-hmm.
Archives is mostly digital, but we are working Bangladesh Feminist Archive more like a institution or like kind of gathering stuff from different people and stuff as well. We are talking with a very famous feminist organization. So we kind of like ask them to like to host us to like to at least keep one room, and we can keep those hard
Mm-hmm.
copies and stuff as well. So we have been a conversation. Feminist archives just like in coming May it will be 1 year. So we are not old
Wow,
enough. But then again, it's more likely we're doing
exciting.
yeah, it's very exciting, and I'm very excited about it. And can I really, really can't wait to go to Bangladesh for a little bit to like to do other stuff as well. I'm very, very curious and very, very excited to like to be there in the next stage. And for queer archiving, it's going well. It's all digitalized, and we are really proud of the work we have done. It's amazing. But I really do think like I personally feel that like physical archives should be always there, and that should be prioritized as well, because there's nothing more than like you go to a physical archive, you see the
It's
the very old and
it's very cool.
very, very
Yeah,
old, very frail, like the papers which been dated very long, long back, and you just feel that it's just it's just going to a museum or something. Although museums are very colonized institutions, I don't
yes, and that's a whole
them.
other yeah.
Yeah, so but then again, yeah, that kind of feel. Yeah.
That so when yeah, you just mentioning museums as pretty colonized institutions. I think about what relationship when you think about transnational feminism is something that you mentioned a little bit ago, and thinking about so and I'll give a stab at this and maybe it'll just go badly and that's okay. But so you have places around the world that were British colonies or, like suffered under colonialism. And then in the current day, there's this overwhelming influence from the United States and other countries in that category. And so there's this influence coming in current day, like culturally, economically, you know, Facebook, giving out phones where Facebook's the only app on the phone, like, things like that. And so, in terms of transnational feminism and relationships between communities, like I heard you saying about, Bangladesh trying to find, trying to listen and kind of emerge, like what does the queer identity of in Bangladesh look like? It's where the United States has formed this, LGBTQ idea. Um, and yeah, I I heard that and I think it's very funny. So, but
Oh
yes,
my God! Right
LGBTQIA,
now, that's the funniest phrase I have ever heard. LGBTQ. It's like
LGBTQ,
absolutely,
yes.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Please continue.
But and so yeah, I just like how can a feminist like me being a feminist in Philadelphia interacting with feminist organizations around the world, but not wanting to do colonialist type things, like wanting to communicate, connect, support, but not wanting to impose.
Hmm. That's a really interesting question, and also I don't have a direct answer of it. But what I kind of
Yeah,
like see is that, yes, U.S. has been like the old colonization has ended, land grabbing and stuff as well. But then again, although there are a lot of stuff happening around the world, we know that.
there's lots happening right now. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
but US has been a new colonizer. Like you colonize a country with your wealth, wealth in a
hmm
sense that like you go their economy, you kind of like control them. You have initiatives like
the dominance of the U.S. dollar as a
yeah,
currency
absolutely,
around the
and
world.
go there and like
Sure.
just colonize them in that sense. But I think the first thing as a person, you acknowledging that like you're colonizing, and that's not good. I think that's the first step. I really do think that. And also,
hmm
I really do think like feminists like you giving giving space like me, like coming to this podcast, I think that's also um a way to like to, collaborating and not just, kind of like you're imposing your voice.
hmm
Okay. You're listening to me. You're making space to like like you have like a place, or you have a, like I would say, kind of like a circle, and whenever you let other voices, the other voices who are not being voiced enough or being colonized, you let them to speak, and I think that's a really good way to like to collaboration, and that's the power of the transnational feminism as well. I think that way. Okay, I always say
hmm
that rather than you writing a piece about me, you invite me, you co-wrote with me. That's the collaboration, like you giving
hmm
other people, the people who has not the power to kind of like to go to that position, you give them to like to make sure that like they have the collaborating power to them. I always feel that that's the spirit. Okay, that's kind of like you try to like to make sure that like you're not imposing on stuff as well. But if you pick me as your as a lab rat and kind of like write a paper about me, not like
hmm
not making me the collaborator rather than like a kind of like a
Like
subject,
a subject. Yes, exactly. A
that
subject
that
rather
becomes
than.
that becomes
hmm
colonizer. That's a savior syndrome. Okay,
hmm
and that is something is very. And I stopped giving interviews or like to the academic scholars or everything. It's like whenever they just want to say, oh, Anna, you have
Mm.
such a nice stories and stuff. I was like, no, make me collaborator. Put me in your paper.
Mm.
If it's a second author, I would be the second author, but I wouldn't be giving you just an interview to like to make it sure that like I'm your subject. Stop. Like so these are the efforts. And there's so
Mm.
many authors right now, they're like, okay, fine. I will make you an author, second author. I will write it. Okay, fine, do that. But give me the like credit, give me the credit, okay? Give me
hmm
a space to like talk. Give me the space that like I can also the spaces you are being occupied, give me a chair on that space. And that's something is very much important. I really do think. So I think Pam, you invited me in your podcast,
Oh,
you listening to me, you letting your particular zone about me. Maybe there are a lot of folks don't know my existence, right? But you're letting me to like to kind of like express myself in front of that. I think that matters. Okay, that really
okay.
matters. And that's how you are not also in the
And trying not to
colonizing.
do that.
Yeah, trying not the
Sure.
colonizing stuff.
That's
It's more
yeah.
likely you are open to like to making sure that like it's an inclusive space, and that's something I appreciate it, and that's why I have also kind of like agreed to come here, to like to kind of chat
Well,
with
thank
you.
you, and I appreciate it. Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
I think, like you said, it's not there's not one answer to any of this ever. It's such a
No, no, no.
complicated question, and that's just it's one place to start.
And also, I
So
really do appreciate that, like, you do not give me beforehand questions and say that, like, I want this particular podcast to be. So these are also
it's
colonial
true. It's all.
colonial
Oh
approach.
yes.
Yeah, like you have to talk, like
Mm,
your kind of background has to be like certain way. You cannot use
mm,
these certain words, or like your English has to be, it's like very well furbished. Okay, eloquently you have to talk. There will be no like this like blah blah blah, like there's so if you kind of like impose those rules on me, still that's a savior syndrome. You gave me
Mm.
the agency to like to talk about myself in my way. I know I did hundreds of grammatical mistakes, but then again, it doesn't matter.
Shit doesn't
A
matter.
language is a language.
It's
Yeah.
not. Yes, this is we're having a
As
conversation.
long you
Hmm.
understand me, as long it's comprehensible to yourself,
Where's the
accent,
problem?
grammar,
Yeah.
don't matter. Yes.
Doesn't matter. It's fine.
Mhm.
I loved talking to you, Anoy. Is there
Uh,
if people wanted to, did you I was gonna say like if there's people want to connect with you, what are like is there anywhere online or like ways they can look up your projects?
Before going to that, I really wanted to ask
Sure.
you a question. Is that
Oh, sure.
how you feel like, like inviting me or like you were
Hmm.
doing other videos and stuff as well. So like, do you have any kind of like, like not intention, but I would say like, what is your like, what's your like vision and mission that like you really wanted to
Oh,
create through this podcast? Like,
oh,
I
thank
really
you
love
for
that like I can
asking.
express myself here. So
Hmm.
is that like you want like to give spaces people who wants to express themselves?
That's very much an intention there. And the there's a few answers to that question of like what's my intention with the show. Some of the simplest and I think almost like purest are because it's fun. Like that's like and I think that that's the one that I try to hold in my little heart and like to keep like for me to do it and even down to how often this podcast comes out every other week.
Mm-hmm.
So even that level is I wanted to do a show because so years ago I used to have a show with a few friends of mine. It was called Touring Incomplete. We recorded 100 episodes. The website's down, but you can probably hunt it down somewhere. I've been meaning to put it in the Internet Archive. But it was me and three friends talking about technology, and we recorded over multiple years, and I had a good time, and I wanted to do a show, and then, I was like, oh, I wanted to produce a show, and so the guiding idea was I want to have fun, and I know, I met so many interesting and fascinating people in my life, and you're one of them,
Thank you.
and I think it's true, and that I think that people are better off having the opportunity to hear these stories and hear from different people doing these, different things that they might not have encountered. And that also, like that just like people are interesting. And then so that's, fun to like a little more purposeful. And then let's get to the pettiness because there's the petty drive of, I remember this is a micro story that because when I start a project, I keep it very close to my heart for a little while and I don't really tell many people and I kind of gently tell people as I'm ready. Because sometimes like, ideas don't make it off of the little idea hill that they're born on or whatever. And so when, I was considering, taking this off of the idea hill, I asked a friend of mine who she's amazing. She's a really accomplished person. She's actually very well known in certain technology circles. And she asked me, "What's the thesis of your podcast?" And I said, "That's not a requirement for a man to have a podcast." And
Oh wow, that's a really good answer. There's been so much like useless podcasts coming to my
so
reels and stuff.
and that's the thing, is if everyone is allowed to have a useless podcast, why not me? So,
The things they
but
talk about, wow.
that's so that's the third petty reason. But the first reason is because it's fun, and then because I, want to talk
I
to
really
these
appreciate it.
interesting
No, no,
people.
no. I really so as an activist, like I do not have a lot of way to like to express myself because I do work for the community. It's more like I
Ooh.
always kind of I don't regret, but I sometimes sometimes whenever you're alone and you were just reflecting your work, like I sometimes feel like I kind of like help a lot of people to express themselves, but there's a lack
But what
of
about me?
what about me? Like nobody wants to like to a lot of people say, "Oh, Anoy is strong, Anoy is fearless, Anoy has this and that." And nobody wants to like to listen to my story. Like I didn't came to hear this
Aw,
place like by myself.
yeah.
So it's such an honor, like you did to me. So like I really wanted to express myself, and I'm so tired of like sometimes like a lot of people are just like, okay, I'm just giving you express yourself. But sometimes tell my friends like, why
Have
people don't
space for yourself.
yeah, I was
Yeah,
like,
that's
why? Like, am
understandable.
I not an interesting person? No, or not. But then
You
again,
absolutely are. Yeah.
yeah. So thank you so much again to like
That's
to
so good.
um answer to your question, like you
How people
just
can find you? Do you do Blue Sky? Do you do like what? Any of these? I can drop them in the show notes if I remember. I will
I
maybe.
mean you just search my name in anywhere you will find me. That's
Great. That's the
I don't
deal.
have a particular, like I'm kind of like a little bit like I would say active in LinkedIn right now, but then again if you search my name you will
LinkedIn is such a funny like it's a winning social network. Like it it works. Like LinkedIn, it's wild.
because
Um,
of like like you do not see crafts from X and Facebook there. Okay, like it's very well curated.
it's
That's why
yeah,
I like
it's
yeah.
yeah, it's business, but then I mean it has its own hilarious culture of,
But
like,
it
and
can
this
be
is
very
what taught me about
annoying.
B2B SaaS.
That
But yeah.
it can be very annoying. I really do not sign up
Yes.
for LinkedIn that like you throw me like it's like, oh, don't do that. There are 5 hacks to like to not to write anything in your
Right.
CV. I was like, no.
No.
One day, one employee came to me and said like this, then that, and I fired them just because of like there's no ambition on there. I was like, I just don't want
Oh yeah, like what? Wait, what?
that. Like what? Like,
It's somehow the most functional social network, and it has just its own flavor of unhinged.
um,
So,
I mean, you
but
can find me
think
X. I'm not in Blue Sky yet, but I'm planning
oh,
to
okay.
like to create because
Yeah,
so many social media, I
there's
have
so
to
many
use,
social media.
yeah.
You can yeah, but then I mean, I think it's funny to from the decentralized web, flavor of people migrating around social medias and trying to declare like we used to have many social things, and it's just like
Yeah, but
it's fine.
but I come from a country where X is or like formerly known Twitter is not that famous. So we have
Yeah,
Facebook. So
so
I use Facebook
right,
because of
Facebook.
like it's very famous in South Asia. It's very famous
Mm-hmm.
in Bangladesh, and it's easier way to like to communicate with Bangladesh from my side. Okay, so I use
Yeah.
Facebook for that, and I'm going to admit that like I haven't given up yet because I have to be there because I work with a community, right? So all
Yes.
of our
And that's where the
groups and
people are.
Facebook stuff
Mm-hmm.
as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So you can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram. You cannot find me on TikTok because of like my TikTok addiction went off the charts. I deleted it, but then again, when I went to Instagram, the reels are the same. Okay,
The
so
reels are just, like from TikTok. Yeah, there is ignore all previous instructions TikTok, but then yeah, I just squatted a handle there basically, and then I ended up deleting the app from my phone. So I'm like, isn't TikTok gonna get banned? Can that happen? Anyway, it's like,
oh
can they
yeah,
hurry that up?
January.
But
Okay,
so
thank you.
but thank you so much for coming on. Thanks thank you for listening to Ignore All Previous Instructions. We're on the social media that I don't update very much, on Instagram at techcult.podcast. It's on YouTube at techcultpodcast. Please like and subscribe, tell a friend, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, rate, review, subscribe, etc. And on Patreon at Tech Cult Podcast if you are so inclined. And thanks so
Abs-
much for coming on, Anoy.